Ballerina, a soulless imitation, or a worthy addition to the John Wick franchise? Ballerina 2025 tells the story of Eve, played by Ana de Armas, a trained assassin who goes on a quest to avenge her father's death and go after his killers. I saw the film this past Friday, and going into the theater I had a few concerns and was a little bit nervous, since there was a lot of questions and concerns on whether the concept of this film could work in any capacity whatsoever. But by the first action sequence, my fears were relieved. Starting off with the positives, I appreciate how the filmmakers approach the action with a new female protagonist. As mentioned previously, many people were concerned with the believability of the character of Eve being able to hold her own in this largely male assassin world. And although I had some concerns, I was very confident that the filmmakers and Ana de Armas herself could pull this off, given her previous role in the last James Bond film, No Time to Die, which consisted of similar action sequences. And thankfully, that confidence paid off. Furthermore, the filmmakers wisely do not portray the character of Eve as invincible. Instead, it acknowledges the fact that in many instances and in many fights, she is going to be at a disadvantage, leading her to have to use her environment, her surroundings, and sometimes fight dirty. And although she ultimately wins these battles, she gets knocked down a lot. So that element of her stumbling, her getting knocked down, and her ultimately winning not due to sheer strength, I felt added a layer of realism and, as before mentioned, believability in these circumstances. Now moving on to my next positive, which is short but crucial. The signature John Wick style. The visuals, the colors, the fashion, and even some of the set design. All elements that set this franchise apart from any other franchise. And I'm happy to say that all of that was reincorporated beautifully in this film. And surprisingly, along with the visuals, the film implements a lot of physical and visual comedy throughout the film. One scene involving a television, another one involving dishes and plates. And these light-hearted comedic moments gave the film a sense of levity and avoided the appearance of being overly serious or being too pretentious, giving the film a personality that sets itself apart from other entries and making the film better overall. And for my last positive of the film, the ending. As mentioned before, the film did an exceptional job at not taking itself too seriously and simply being fun. So in a style similar to the previous John Wick endings, there's no monologues, there's no dragging out the runtime. It ends with a small, certain event, and then a door closing on our main character, leaving audiences in anticipation for the next chapter. And for me personally, it absolutely worked. Now moved on to the mixed aspects, and for this I had two that stood out to me. The first being the return of the Baba Yaga. As mentioned in my out of theater reaction, I believe this film could have worked fine as a standalone without the incorporation of John Wick's character. However, let's talk about what worked for me with his return. And that would be his second appearance in the film. In this scene, John Wick is sent to confront Eve and to convince her to abandon her quest to go after her father's killers, maintaining the balance and reestablishing the order within this world. And in this sequence, there is a brief fight between John and Eve. And what's compelling about that fight is this is one of the few times that we see John Wick restrain himself. And it's made clear there are multiple instances where he's holding back, but able to take down Eve multiple times with ease. And simply that dynamic of restraint from that character is something we haven't really seen before, and truly made his return compelling. Next, I appreciate how the filmmakers did not feel they needed to diminish the character of John Wick in order to elevate the character of Eve. While Eve is very skilled, it is made immediately clear that she is not on the level of John Wick. So I appreciate how the filmmakers respected the legacy of that character rather than diminishing it to try to pass the torch to the next person. Now for the elements that did not quite work, and that would be his appearance at the beginning of the film. In this sequence, it shows an additional scene from John Wick Chapter 3, where John and Eve share a brief conversation. While this sequence gives clarity of when in the timeline this film takes place, the interaction comes off a little bit too forced and really unnecessary. And personally, I think the film might have worked better if they cut that first scene and that first interaction completely and remove John Wick from the promotional materials and the trailers, and let that moment at the end be a nice surprise for audience members, as there were plenty of characters from previous entries to tie it back into the John Wick world without the return of John Wick himself. And now my second mixed aspect, and that would be the story. Yes, I'm aware that this franchise started with the man avenging the death of his dog and car. However, the story of Eve avenging her father's death feels a little bit too generic, and I feel like the filmmakers explained way too much regarding it. Opposed to the previous films where we get flashbacks and glimpses into John Wick's past, in this film we get a whole 10 to 15 minute opening sequence regarding Eve's father, leaving very little to the imagination, and I feel like that element just did not work. However, it did move the plot forward, and I suppose gave a reason for the action that takes place after the fact, so mixed element. Now the negatives, and for this I only had two, the first being the dialogue. As alluded to earlier, there is a lot of exposition within the dialogue, a lot of explaining of past events and past plot points. So as a result, there's a lot of scenes that feel forced and just completely unnatural. And the second and final negative that I have with this film is some of the visual effects are a little bit shaky in some places. One instance in particular with a car accident, and some of the fight scenes being sped up to give the illusion of a faster pace that was noticeable in some parts of the film. But overall, guys, I really enjoyed this film. It gave me so much more than what I was expecting, and I feel a lot of John Wick fans will be pleasantly surprised as well. It was not a cash grab, it was not a cheap reboot, it was an additional chapter in the series. And there's nothing more I can say about that. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. Drop a comment down below with your thoughts, your opinions on this new film, what you liked, what you didn't like, and what do you think is next for Ballerina. Take care, and God bless.